This week, we welcome Ben Carr, Chief Information Security Officer at Aristocrat. In the Leadership and Communication segment, how to make sure your board sets a good example for your company. Cybersecurity is putting customer trust at the center of competition. 6 reasons your home office is better than your company office, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/PSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 120, recorded March 11th, 2019. I am your host, Matt Alderman, finally back in the state of Colorado, joined by my co-host, Paul Asadorian in G-Unit Studio in Rhode Island.
Thanks, Matt. What's going on?
Oh, what a week last week. So just getting caught up.
Matt, it sounds like your audio's cutting in now.
It's interesting.
Not sure why.
Yeah. Hopefully it's not my internet connection, my 1 gig fiber connection. It was supposed to be better than...
Anyway, what's going on?
All right. Ocean is hosting Rhode Island Cybersecurity Exchange Day on March 13th at the O'Hare Academic Building at Salve Regina in Newport, Rhode Island. Register now at ocean.org/events. That's OSHEAN.org. Also, join us April 1st to 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019. Visit infosecworld.misty.com/security-weekly and use the registration code OS19-SecWeek for 15% off the main conference or World Pass. We will be recording at InfoSec World 2019. If you are interested in booking an interview or a briefing with Security Weekly, please visit securityweekly.com/conference request to learn more. All right, let's start with our guest. Ben Carr is the Chief Information Security Officer at Aristocrat and North America's Technical Director for Tenable. Obviously, we worked together in the past. Prior to Tenable, Ben was Senior Director, Global Information Security at Visa and Head of Global Corporate IT Security at Nokia. Ben has also served on advisory board for Mimecast, Qualys, Accuvant, and SentinelOne. Ben, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Good seeing you, man.
Yeah, good being here.
So a little history for everybody. Ben was at Visa when I was running VP of Strategy at Tenable, and we were looking at hiring out kind of field CTOs, what we call technical directors, to really help enable the field with sales and kind of vision and strategy and all those other things. So I brought Ben over, and we worked together for a number of years at Tenable before you now ended up.
I was going to say, Ben, you look really familiar now. Okay, that's why.
Yeah, blast from the past.
That's right.
And Matt, we've known each other since I was at Nokia, actually, right?
Way back in the day. Yeah, I think I was at Accuvant or Qualys. I think I was at Accuvant at the time when you were.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So give everybody a little intro because your background's interesting, right? I mean, you Nokia and Visa, obviously, in security roles. You went to the vendor side for a little bit. Now you're back in a CISO role. Kind of give us to help everybody kind of understand those transition points.
Yeah, so it feels a little weird saying way back in the day because it is way back in the day now. But I actually started out in the IT side, running kind of operations in regular IT, and then decided at one point to go over to the vendor space. So I worked for McAfee for a while, and that's how I actually got into security. And then worked for quite a few vendors up until this point where I went over and worked for Nokia and ran security for them globally after about 4 years. And then went over to Visa. So really transitioned over to Visa, just really interesting environment, interesting problem to solve from a security aspect. Most people think of Visa as a financial, but really more of a technology company. And so from that technology factor, actually securing the infrastructure and securing the network for Visa, really kind of one of their core competencies, one of the things that was really core to the business proposition, right? As you can imagine, if competence in Visa was removed from a large incident, that could severely impact the brand. So that's how I got over there. But after having been at Visa for about 4 years, really decided that it was time to move on, do something else. And we had the discussions around you being at Tenable and what Tenable was doing. Really believed in the vision and strategy with where Tenable was going. So went back over to the vendor space for a while, right? Did about 2 years at Tenable. Really good experience for me. Moved on to take a larger role as a VP of strategy right before Tenable went public, and then just decided I wanted to get back in the internal space. Right, I wanted to run a program somewhere. Wanted to actually implement a lot of the strategy and direction that I had been a believer in, and so took this role. And now here at Aristocrat, running global information security for public company. We're doing business in over 300 regulatory environments, over 90 countries, global footprint, 5 different business units. It's really exciting place to be, and so really getting to implement security the right way.
So I don't think many people know Aristocrat. Unless you're in the gambling industry,
it's not a well-known brand outside of the industry, I think, right?
I thought it's not coffee.
That's true. So a lot of people probably know Aristocrat, but don't know Aristocrat in the sense that Aristocrat's in the gaming space, and by gaming I mean actual casino gaming. And also the digital arena. So Aristocrat's been around for quite some time, Australian-based public company, but we're in the EGM space, electronic gaming machines. So when you go to Vegas, when you go to a casino and you play a slot machine, there's high odds that you're probably playing on one of our machines. So
now,
we
Ben,
operate both.
Ben, do you compete or have ever competed with a company called IGT? Used to be GT.
Yes.
Okay.
Same space.
Now I know the name from I used to work for when it was then GTech here in Rhode Island. Yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly. So class 3, right, which is casino, typical casino gaming, and then also class 2. So we're a very big presence in the class 2, which is more tribal casinos, that type of gaming. So really, from a lot of its tax basis.
Now wait, including Foxwoods out here in the Northeast. Yep. I was just spent the night there with my family.
Yeah, very nice casino. I've been there a couple times.
It is nice, yeah.
Yeah, and then we realized that there's only so many new casinos being developed and going up. So one of the things for us to look at how to expand the brand and how to expand the business is we dove into the digital space. And so we acquired a company called Big Fish Games, a company called Product Madness, and a company called Polarium. And so they're part of our portfolio of companies, and really in the freemium and pay-to-play space inside of iPads, iPhones, Android.
Got it.
Well, that's cool.
So you're in this interesting space, right? You make gaming machines. You've got all these digital gambling kind of game component. What are some of the challenges you face from a security perspective? Not only, I guess, what you're challenged with today, but also some of those things that are unique to you a little bit.
Yeah, so I think especially coming from a market like a company like Visa, in that market space, it's highly regulated. And when you talk to people here in our business, they think of this business as highly regulated. But from a security perspective, it's not really that highly regulated. We don't face PCI, SOX, HIPAA, GLBA. Like there's not really a ton of regulatory compliance that then mandates a set of security controls. So we're really trying to implement security because it's the right thing to do for the business and manage against the risk, versus a lot of other industries where you're actually, I guess, buoyed up by the fact that there's compliance controls that are, I guess, the baseline for your security program, right? So there's a good and a bad to that. I think also we're dealing with two very traditionally different businesses. What we call our land business, or the casino business, is really about making machines that we then sell to a casino, or we lease to a casino, and so they're on site. And is, if you think about the footprint and what we're looking at from a security perspective, there's not a lot of forward-facing stuff. It's more protecting the core infrastructure. But
yeah,
then,
Ben, I was going to ask you a question about that, because when I was designing secure network or security for lottery networks, which is very different from a gaming.
We also do that as well. We participate in the lottery side too.
Yeah, so we could have interesting conversations. I don't think on air is probably the right place to talk about how they're securing the lottery. But in terms of on the casino floor, I mean, do you basically sell them the machine, and then the security that they implement in their network is all them? Or do you also consult with some of the casinos to help them with their security? Say, look, you bought this machine. Here's typically how it's secured. Yeah,
good question. So you can think about it on the casino floor. It's really selling a device, right? Mm-hmm. But we've also entered into, there was a law change several years ago that allowed actually machines to be leased. So if you think software as a service for casino gaming, right? Mm-hmm. We basically host the machine, and there's a revenue sharing model in place there for that. Right. But typically the traditional businesses sell them a box, and it's on the casino floor, and their security is essentially responsible for that. And the connectivity to the device doesn't really affect the back end game system, right? Mm-hmm. So there's not as much concern in that arena. We certainly do have security concerns around the security of the manufactured product, mm-hmm. but it's not, when it's on the floor, it's really up to the casino security to protect, the security of someone accessing that device.
Right. Yeah. So what you're saying is that you're not putting a whole bunch of research and development into securing the physical device and making it tamper-proof. I'm sure you do some of those things. But a casino, correct. Is covered in cameras and people on the floor. So the opportunity that an attacker would have to tamper with a device, they'd be spotted.
Yeah, you think about the security investment for any one casino. Right. It's immense, right? So it's a much different perspective there.
And to give you an example, I went up to the bar actually at the local casino, local in Connecticut, right? And I said, I want 2 drinks, one for me and one for my wife. He's like, no, 1 drink per person. There has to be another person here. And I'm like, well. Yeah. My wife's up in the room with 3 kids. He's like, dude, I hear you. He's like, but there's cameras. If I serve you 2 drinks, everywhere. Like, I'm done. I'm like, I don't want to get you in trouble. We'll figure something out, right?
Yeah, I wish I had those eyes on, right? We don't have that level of visibility. Mm-hmm. So, but that, and then that's, you ask where things are unique to us. Then that's, I think, from our business perspective, that's the divide, is that there's that perception for, I guess, the land-based business, our mm-hmm. casino business, and then there's a much different perception and the footprint of what's customer facing and what's internet facing from a digital perspective, mm-hmm. hugely different, right? I mean, all those assets are then, on the internet, digital facing, apps on iPads, apps on, iPhones and Android devices around the world. So mm-hmm. that exposure and the amount of information we have. So we don't really have the information on the customers in the same way that we do in the digital space, right? In the land business, the casinos own that data, and the casinos own the interaction with the end customers. And in the digital space, we own that interaction. So it's almost like having 2 different business models that you're trying to deal with and figure out how to best secure those and how to make the decisions around implementations and security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have specific challenges from a manufacturing perspective of the physical land-based device. Get it?
Yes.
But then to your point, I'm now dealing with users, privacy, data, everything else up in the digital space, completely different set of concerns that you now have to be aware of and protect on that side of the business.
Yeah, it really is almost 2 different businesses, right? But there's a blend, trying to take like intellectual property that we have on those casino games mm-hmm. and figure out how to bring that into the digital space, as well as, you can imagine the digital is a lot more fluid. So being able to look at the IP we have in the digital space and how we can gain information and insights to transition that into, the more physical world of that land-based casino business to produce more popular games. So I mean, there's definitely a cross population, but it's a unique challenge to try to figure out how to secure those two different environments, with essentially one budget.
It's interesting, Ben, when I was working in gaming, there was kind of a transition, and actually Linux was being used in some of the gaming devices versus like a real-time OS that like nobody had any idea what it was. Like, it was really obscure, sometimes written by the actual gaming company itself before there was a lot of, forget, like the company I worked for was in business for 30 plus years before I got there. So they would like write their own operating systems for the gear, and that was still there when I was there. But as we transition some of these devices perhaps to more accessible operating systems, does that increase the security requirements in your mind?
It does. I think anytime you build on a closed system, there's pros and cons to that, right? So there's the concept of security by obscurity, where that no one really knows that closed system. But then typically in a closed system, you're not getting as much review, and so the potential for security issues are always there.
Right.
We've certainly moved to that more open system standpoint of either Linux or Windows based environment, which it really surprised me actually that some of these things are actually Windows based. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the same thing here from a history perspective, going out to corporate, you'll see actual games that were physical machines, right? There's really not any OS or software behind them. They're really physical, and so transitioning that whole transitional and life cycle and moving into that, now coming full circle to where we're trying to figure out how do we produce games that are really a lot more open and easily transitionable from.
Right. Yeah, there was some of that. Like, they develop a game, and then I think, Ben, what you're saying is right. That moves to different platforms. That could end up in an app. That could end up on a website. Right. And we had different countries that had different laws about where you could do gaming and how you could do gaming, and they would take shape in those various markets.
Yeah. And that's a big piece of it, is the regulatory environment and how you determine that shapes a lot of our industry, right? So what can you put in the cloud? What's publicly accessible? What has to be in a casino floor? Jurisdictional issues, right? So you can't operate that outside of a jurisdiction. So I think from a gaming perspective, a lot of these companies would like to figure out how to move that off the casino floor into more accessible environment. But that just isn't possible due to the regulations. There was just a change made last year around sports betting, right? So I think everybody's trying to figure out how to get into the digital sports betting side of the house. So it's an evolving industry, and it's something that's been traditionally, I think, a lot more controlled by local regulation. And with the with the internet, it's just become something that people are trying to figure out how do they consume it in this new paradigm.
And it's interesting, by regulation, we're not talking about security guidelines at all, right? These
No,
are all regulations surrounding gaming.
Yeah, so when we say highly regulated environment, we mean if you want to ship a device to a casino in, making something up here, but a casino in Oklahoma, it has to go from the manufacturing floor to the casino in a truck with nothing else on that truck. So you can't just put it in a FedEx truck and ship it. That's an example of like gaming regulations, right? Or just, personally, like if you have to go for a review to make sure that your background check meets gaming requirements, right? All of our specific individuals in the company have to go through gaming regulatory approval and then have a gaming license, right? And so from that perspective, that has no bearing really on security. I mean, you could lightly draw some conclusions about it, but there's no specific requirement that says you must do scanning on a weekly basis. You must have, intrusion detection system. You must be doing CASB.
And is it company policy or regulation, or maybe a mixture, that says you can't play any games, right? I'm sure you have that. I had that restriction. Like I couldn't, if I did play the lottery, I couldn't win. You couldn't win,
It's a mix. So there's some things that I think are just burdened by the fact that there's regulation that says if you're in this jurisdiction, you're not allowed to. There's other things that just company policy to make it easy for employees to understand what the regulations are with all the different gaming jurisdictions.
Right.
And it's funny, you can play someone else's machines, but we can't play our own machines. So
right. Yeah. Exactly.
It's kind of like helping out the competition, right?
Yeah. What are some of the solutions you're looking for as you think about your environment? And I think most of it's probably on the digital side, but What are some of those solution areas where you still need some help? I'm curious where you're trying to solve problems in your environment today.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has been core blocking and tackling and buoying up the security controls that we have, putting things in place that make sense for a new environment. So things like how do we do business across multiple companies well? So single unified identity and how we access those that transact information securely back and forth between the organization, but as well externally, right? Sharing that data. So I think back in my history to like rights management, trying to implement that so we could share data securely with external vendors. It's not really done that well. It's done well internally when you're federated internally, but it's not done when you start wanting to deal with a lot of third parties. Um, Trying to figure out how to implement real good development security. So as we move into containers and Dockers and trying to figure out how to make that extensible and really make sure that security is left in the cycle, less costly to the business, and how we're able to take those business concerns about speed to production and speed to development, but still make that production and that life cycle a secure life cycle. I think that's really the biggest thing from a digital side, and where I think we don't have solutions yet.
So you hit two of my favorites, identity and application. I'm sure you've got some data aspects too, from a privacy perspective and other things also. But I mean, you kind of there in this new digital transformation kind of environment.
Yeah, and it's funny. We've been talking about identity for so long, right? I mean, remember back when we were when I was at Nokia, when we first started interacting. I mean, that was one of the big challenges we had there was how do you handle identity, not just internally, but also again with all the business people you need to interact with and the business partners, and how do you utilize that identity in a secure, safe, and trustable manner? And I still don't think it's been solved in a great way yet, right? I think there's still a lot of solutions, and I still think the market's somewhat fragmented. So, if you go to somebody who's a great IDP provider, but they don't actually offer a great PAM solution, right? And so we're trying to piece that whole puzzle together for identity, and they don't have a great way to federate with externals. And then how do we also tie that back to the identities that we issue for our customer base? How do we ensure that that's good? And then that bleeds into that data piece that you provided, is like, how do we manage that only the people who are supposed to access that data are accessing that data, and how do we transact and track that data through the environment, through the life cycle of the data? I mean, GDPR has just been crazy, from a right to be forgotten, having to give somebody information on what we have about them in a specific period of time. I mean, that's just really hard, especially in the digital space, as people stand up and drop identities very quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been saying the same thing in identity, right? It's too fragmented. There's an opportunity to bring more capabilities into a single platform to make it easier for companies that are struggling with this, not only internally, but also all that external connectivity, because we talk a lot about the shift of the perimeter to the person and the application, and identity solutions are going to be a big part of how you control that kind of emerging perimeter. And that's where I'd like to see a lot more innovation in bringing things together in an easier way.
Or even, crossing of identity platforms, right? So one of the problems we're having right now is we're looking for some things in an MSSP world, and you talk to the MSSP and they've standardized on an identity provider. But then does that match the same identity provider that we have? If not, do they allow multiple identity providers to connect? How does that work if we're using a solution that they are hosting, but we want access to that as well, and their identity provider isn't the same as our identity provider? I mean, the inability to use multiple identity providers to access one service, I mean, that starts to break a lot of the interactions and the collaboration that we want to have with people. So again, I just don't think that that somebody's have a great solution for a real strategic enterprise way to solve this. I think it's very single centric point of view on this, and that's harmful, I think, to the industry.
Yeah, agreed. So give us an idea, Ben, kind of what's your structure internally? Who do you report to? How often are you in front of the board, et cetera? I'm just, for others, because we see the CISO role report to various places in the organization. Where are you at in the org?
Yeah, so I report to the CIO, who reports up to the CEO, and so from that perspective, it's a rather typical alignment, I would say. I've seen the same thing as you. People report into legal. I've seen people report into other areas of the organization as well. I think ultimately, I think the CISO role long term, and I think we've seen this for some organizations already. I think that that's going to be a much more direct report up to the CEO or to to the board, because that line of communication, it's really important that you have that dialogue back and forth to be able to have an honest discussion about the state of the state and where things are. And I think the responsibility as we move further and further into that digital space, it's just going to be really more important to have that dialogue and that communication.
So are you having that dialogue today? Kind of how often are you having that dialogue?
Yeah, some. So, I mean, I have an open channel to the CEO if I need to have a communication there. Although I think, just functionally not having that direct report, it puts a layer in there between there. But I think that's expected. A lot of companies that are going through, the maturity phases that we are. I think to be able to consume that data and have that discussion is something that takes time. I communicate with the board probably on a quarterly basis. Certainly our executive steering committee on a quarterly basis or more often, depending upon when they need updates or when I have something to communicate. But yeah, I have access. It's just trying to get to the point where we consume that information in a relevant fashion where it's understood. And so I think contextualizing a lot of that information as we build the program and build the maturity.
Yeah. So I assume you're still kind of working through some of those metrics and measurements that you want to share with the board and your executive committee as you're evolving the program, right? So, I mean, that takes some time too.
Yeah. So this was security before I came here was a part of IT, right? So this is the first CISO role that Aristocrat has had. And so part of that was building foundationally what the role should do, how it interacted with the organization, and then building out a team. So I built out my direct reports at this point. We're further building out. So plug for us if anybody's looking for a role. We've got a number of individual contributor roles we'll be posting very shortly here. Trying to complete out the team and build out the org structure internally to support that. But part of that is I just hired a person, actually came from one of the organizations in Las Vegas, to handle GRC. And so building out that risk and governance function and being able to generate the right report data. I think one of the things that people fail at in this role is sending up the wrong data. Again, that communication with the board, with the steering committee, and with the CEO, it's really important to put the right context on that data. And I think what you communicate and how you motivate people really is important to get the end result you want. And so if you put up the wrong metrics, if you say, we have this large number of vulnerabilities, does that really help anybody out contextualize it? It's always, a red flag that you're sending up. And I think sometimes it's important to say, we have a large number of vulnerabilities, but contextually the risk to our organization is X. And it's not as high as what you would necessarily perceive by just the number of vulnerabilities. Same thing, like what do you consider an incident and what isn't an incident? What is just, an event that happened, but it was triaged and handled, and so never really turned into an incident. I think we've got to be careful, especially in this role as a CISO, and being able to contextualize the right information for the consumers of the data. That way they can understand how they're supposed to respond to it, as opposed to just a mountain of information which they don't understand how to take in and how to contextualize for themselves.
Yeah, tying those metrics back to a set of business goals and then trying to communicate the alignment to those goals is more of a business risk discussion than it is a sheer volume of vulns, incidents, missing patches, et cetera. There has to be context so the business knows how to consume it and make decisions on how to either mitigate or transfer or accept risk.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're communicating with my peers or with the CEO or the board, I think the ask is like, what do you want the business to do? What's the objective you're looking for that we're going to achieve? And so, if you just send a bunch of data up there, there's not really a business context to that. And I think you're asking people who have really little to no concept of security, right? In our world, I mean, I think they have a layperson's, but this is, definitely a specialized skill. When you're asking someone to contextualize and take that in, you're overwhelming them. They don't know how to respond. But if you can put it in a business context so they understand like what you're asking, this is a specific level of risk. We're asking from this from the business, whether it's resource dollars, a change in a business process, what's the impact to the business as a result of that, then the discussions become a lot cleaner. I think when we don't do that, it's a much more difficult discussion, and that's when we see people failing at I think these roles and even lower. I mean, I'm asking my directs to think in business context and think in business terms.
That's good. That's great. Any tips, recommendations for others looking to move into a CISO role?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. It's challenging, right? I think the first thing is, you've got to have the right background and skills. You have to have a little bit of diversity there. If you come up through one piece of the security org, I think it's not necessarily as easy to move into that role. I think you have to bring a different background. And so one of the things that was beneficial to me is actually I wasn't in the internal IT security space for my whole career. I had kind of the vendor side of it, exposure to a lot of different technologies, as well as being on the sales side of it, right? And actually interacting with a lot of different customers to understand their pain points and understand, again, some of what that business context and issues were, even though maybe they weren't expressing it themselves. And so I think having that varied background was helpful for me in positioning myself as being able to interact with the business, being able to understand what their issues were. And then the CISO role is a sales role. I mean, it just really is when it comes down to it. And I don't mean that in a used car salesman way. I mean it in a, you have to position what your objectives and what you're trying to achieve are, put it in a way that makes sense for the business, and you have to sell that solution. So at the end of the day, when it comes down to the discussion about dollars and resources, you're able to get the dollars and resources you need to be successful in your program. And so I think those are the things that that companies are looking for. Yeah, I mean, keep trying. Don't give up if you're not finding the role you want. Don't stay in a job that you're not happy with. That's not making you happy. At the end of the day, the people talk about work-life balance, but I think if you're not happy in the work piece of that balance, then ultimately your life piece is gonna suffer. So, I mean, I'm a firm believer in making sure that you're doing what you're happy with, and that'll lead to success in the end.
Yeah, take an SE role and go outbound for a little bit and then come back inside, maybe, just to give you the kind of that
it doesn't
variation.
hurt. I mean, yeah, people, I think often in the internal side, they don't want to, they look at vendors with a little bit of disdain sometimes, right? Or as a meal ticket, a good lunch, good dinner now and then. But I think it's a different perspective. And I think you get exposed to a lot more of the environment and a lot more of the challenges that we deal with on a day-to-day side internally. I mean, if you've spent your whole career in two companies over 20 years internally, your perspective is going to be pretty narrow, right? I mean, you've got to get out there and see what's going on in the environment.
Yeah, especially in this world where we're constantly evolving, right? Technology's changing, shifting of deployment strategies. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. And if you don't have some of that exposure, you don't always understand the challenges outside of what you know, which may be a very narrow view.
Yeah, and I think also, like, one of the things that I've seen this advice before, and I've taken it to heart a little bit, is like, don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. I mean, if you're always looking at a role and saying, hey, I don't know if I'm ready for that CISO role yet. I mean, you're never going to be ready for your first CISO role. It is definitely a shift, right? That is one of the, I guess, the things that I expected, but it was more so than I guess you can prepare for, is that the level of responsibility and the decisions that you have to make are at a much different level than if you're reporting to a CISO, right? Or if you're a senior director at a public company. It just becomes a different level of impact, and you don't have somebody to go to and say, what do you think? It's all on you. So you're going to have to step outside of your comfort zone. So if you're not ready for that, step out of your comfort zone a little bit now, like take on some other responsibility, some other role, get involved with the business further. And I think in general, just getting involved with the business and trying to understand, because at this level, the questions aren't like, how should we be secure? The questions are, how do we do the right thing for the business from a risk perspective? And so that business level discussion is something you've got to figure out how to answer.
Yeah, agreed. Paul, do you have any more questions for Ben?
I do not. I enjoyed the discussion about lottery and gaming. It was fun.
Yeah, we should have an offline discussion about that sometime,
Absolutely.
Paul. It'd be interesting to pick your brain.
Cool.
Ben, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly. We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.